Are we not doing the
Greg, don't look so serious.
pros and cons question?
Which one?
Yeah.
Okay, we're allowed in 3.
Wait, which one?
There was a question on pros and cons of using AI in state government, I think.
Do I not have that one?
I didn't see that. Unless this is just missing a page.
Oh, it's on here. It's on my.
Oh,
yeah.
this is just wrong, sorry.
Yeah, I still remember.
I'm,
I got it.
Now we're ready.
Are we ready?
Maybe.
Am I looking at this camera?
Straight ahead, yeah. All right, take away whenever you're ready.
Ready? Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the structure of the Maryland Department of Information Technology and how we can improve our overall security, technology, digital experience, and accessibility. We are fortunate to have with us our newly appointed State Chief Information Security Officer, Greg Rogers, Chief Operations Officer, Melissa Lehman, Chief Technology Officer, Michelle Thomas, Chief Digital Experience Officer, Marcia Jacobs, Director of Accessibility, Andrew Drummond, and last but not least, Senior Advisor for Responsible AI, Nishant Shah. And I'm Katie Savage, the Secretary of DoIT, and I'll be the moderator for our discussion. So before we jump in, let's maybe go around the room and talk about some of the goals you all have planned for the state. Melissa, coming into DoIT, you've been with us for a while. One of my goals was to bring more talent to the agency, and you've been a key leader in regard to thinking about how we can improve our HR and operations. Can you talk us through some of your thought process for taking on this task and some of the key changes that have already been implemented?
Sure. So one of the things that was very obvious the Moore Miller administration focused on was bringing in subject matter experts to oversee all of the executive branch agencies, such like yourself. It was very refreshing, actually, when Secretary Savage joined, and one of the first things she noticed was that we need more people. We need a lot more people. And fortunately, well, we went from having actually one deputy secretary and a CISO who oversaw all IT operations and cybersecurity, very much operating in silos, to being able to bring in all of the subject matter experts sitting around me today with the support of the administration and also partnering with Tech Talent Project. And so we now have multiple verticals where we can focus on things like, you know, expanding our enterprise services, focusing on what is digital experience, cybersecurity, and maybe centralizing a cybersecurity plan. And those are the things we're going to be doing, and we'll all be working seamlessly together. And so our vision, really, as we move forward, is going to be going from drinking out of a water hose on a daily basis to being able to focus on defining the services that we provide, ensuring that we're providing all of the services and meeting all the needs of our customers, making sure that we're meeting all of our statutory requirements, which also seems to grow every year, guys, get ready. And really, over the next couple of months, we'll be focusing on continuing to fill the vacancies that we have and bringing DoIT to that next phase and the next level.
Great. Greg, your thoughts about our current security posture and how we can enhance it?
Yeah, so, one of the things that's happened recently is the state did an assessment of all the agencies on their security posture. So we're taking those results in. We're looking at not only individual issues, but we're looking at trends across the state and how we can use that information to not just secure each individual agency, but build a security program that addresses those across the state. So my team and I are working on that assessment. We're identifying those trends. We're from that going to build a policy library, our security standards, all of those things that we can implement across the state to address those problems and really mitigate and bring down the risk that the state is operating at currently in cyberspace. In addition to that, we're really looking at building a centralized cybersecurity service management program. We have a number of platforms like Tenable and CrowdStrike we're looking to roll out across the state, provide those services, manage it inside, but allow the agencies to have a hand in administering them and overseeing their own program. The other piece of that is we want to provide an information security officer program. So by building that, we would provide expert guidance, the policies and guidelines on how you build your security program. But then you would have that ISO program, that leadership within your organization to help implement that program. So we're not looking to reinvent the wheel across the state. We really want to reuse, one program for everybody, really standardize that. And that ISO program will then allow you to tailor your program to your business needs. So you'll have a functional expert within your organization that knows what you need, knows what your needs are, and can work with OSM and myself to implement that.
So speaking of sort of how we better customize our enterprise services, Michelle, can you provide some insights on IT operations for the state currently and what processes we can adopt to upgrade our
Sure.
current IT
A couple
enterprise?
things come to mind. One is increasing our use of process automation. I think it would make us more efficient and allow us to focus on what's the better value for the citizens so that we can carry forward the governor's agenda. It's not about eliminating jobs. It's about increasing efficiency. It's about being more productive. It's about changing our role within the workplace and increasing our knowledge. I think another thing is enterprise operational governance, where everybody understands what our processes are and they're not squirreled away and hidden somewhere, but that we actually partner with the agencies and the agency stakeholders to make sure that we're as efficient and that we're providing the kind of guidance that they need and that they expect. And the other thing is, from an enterprise service standpoint, leveraging the services that make sense to use, leveraging the services in a cost-effective manner, and then offering those services at tiered levels so that smaller agencies and larger agencies can select the services that make sense for them.
That's great. Marcy, this question as originally written was, what's your vision on how we can enhance the user experience of digital platforms?
Please change the question. at the
Yeah,
last minute.
I would say, just really, how can we change, how should we be thinking about our digital platforms writ large? I think it's more than just user experience, but I think it's kind of a more complete process, but.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think user experience is more than digital and digital is
Yeah.
more than user experience, but both start with people.
Yeah.
And really understanding what do people need from government. There's a lot of evidence that shows that when people have an easier time interacting with government services, that their trust in government overall goes up, and when they have a harder time interacting with government, it impacts that negatively. So thinking about digital experiences not from the lens of technology, but from the lens of people, and understanding what people need and what are their barriers to accessing the services and benefits that they need. Those people might be state employees, they might be employers, they might be residents, but thinking about that whole end-to-end journey and really starting with that customer-backed lens is how I approach these types of problems.
Yeah. Along those lines, Andrew, how can we ensure that our digital presence is accessible to individuals regardless of their abilities?
Great question. I think the typical approach would be to focus on testing and audits and bringing in vendors, but I think a very good approach here that we're looking at, Marcy and myself are looking to roll out here at DoIT is a proactive approach focused on governance. That would be the creation of like an accessibility statement as we're building out the state's first ever digital accessibility policy, standard operating procedures about how vendors should interact with state government, the leveling up of the procurement process through integration, work that Secretary Savage is leading with other state leaders, such as DGS and Maryland Department of Disabilities, and trying to modernize and level up the procurement process. Edification of procurement staff as well, ensuring that procurement staff have an understanding of accessibility as they're going through the procurement process, especially as they're working with IT procurements as well. The building out of the Office of Accessibility's web presence and a centralized place for the creation of a learning environment where folks can come and learn the basics of web accessibility and digital accessibility. But just a big focus on governance. I think that's going to be a big thing for us to be successful.
And speaking of leveling up services, Sean, can you talk about the pros and cons of AI in state government?
Yeah, there are a lot of them. I think for some context, and I've said this before, but I think it bears some repeating. I strongly believe that what happens in the next 3 to 5 years in AI governance will determine significant elements of what happens in the next 30. So we're entering a sort of really important period right now. There's a sort of Cambrian explosion happening in AI right now, and that makes today's pros and cons very different than what tomorrow's pros and cons will be. And I think that's a sort of important point to keep in mind. We know like it's tough for institutions to act in the face of sort of exponential curves, and I think that's particularly true for environments that have to be risk averse, like state governments, because real people depend on the services we provide, and we can't fail them. So that makes state level AI pretty complicated. Cities and counties, sort of given their size, are sometimes closer to the citizen. Federal entities and lawmakers set sort of countrywide standards. There's still work to be done now to figure out essentially, legislatively, strategically, what is the state's role here? And we see different states around the country taking different approaches. So, first the cons, the tech is evolving. There's a proliferation of standards. We're just learning what works in AI governance, and much of that will be sort of need to be revisited as the capabilities change. That makes building strategy and rules of the road more complicated, particularly as national level AI policy is still sort of in flux. There's also real risks to leveraging AI and automated decision-making systems in general, sort of without guardrails in place, around fairness and bias, around security, around privacy, and sort of other risks that will emerge over time as well. So we need to be intentional and clear-eyed about how we mitigate those, as sort of like Hippocratic oath, essentially, in terms of the way that we approach this technology, and sort of, finally building AI, as it's like a muscle that we have yet to exercise at scale within the state. So it'll be steep learning curves to conquer in front of state agencies. I think the pros, on the other hand, are like really significant. To sum it up, like when we get good at this, we can let humans do human things and machines do machine things. Large language models, for example, allow automation that weren't possible even a year ago. I think of AI as a sort of like Jarvis suit of sorts that allows us to be better at what we do. That has the potential to, yield reduced costs in some areas, significantly sort of improve services and outcomes in others, improve accessibility, and sort of once guardrails are in place to entirely approach new services. So once those basic foundations are in place, I think, we can think bigger, and this is sort of just a personal view, but, as the technology shop underpinning citizen
what does it look like for you as the end user to get a pre-populated SF-86 and just, you just verify it, and the investigators just verify it.
I appreciated that.
Yeah.
When I went through it.
Yeah, so to your point, it's when we think about just lifting and shifting, we're missing an opportunity to reimagine.
And I think when we talk about modernizing requirements that were written 30, 40 years
Right.
ago, they don't always map to
Yeah.
truly what is the right process today, and how do we leverage changes that have happened in the last however many years, that maybe we can streamline processes as opposed to building what was
Yeah.
into the new system.
Yeah. Melissa, I don't know if you have anything to add I know you've invested a lot in contract management and fiscal responsibility.
Right.
And
I think everything that Marcy just said leads to what ultimately ends up in a procurement. If we don't already have a solution, right, you need to make sure that you have all the requirements ahead of time. And you can only get all those adequate requirements that result in a successful procurement when all of those things happen from the very beginning. A lot of what we see across the state are failed procurements, and that really comes down to because of the fact that we don't have the right requirements in place, or that the business processes haven't been updated accordingly. And so if we can get all that done ahead of time, I do think that projects overall will be more successful. Hopefully there's less spend ultimately, and we can do more with less, which seems to be the case quite often.
or build or prototype it ourselves. I think
Right.
one of the things that we've talked about too is, and where I think, those of us who come from the digital services world have seen, is there an opportunity to build an early stage prototype that, if successful, then you can, take it into the procurement process. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there. So we've talked about modernization a lot, but are there other perspectives about what that word means for DoIT, and what, from any of your perspectives, what a modernization standard should look like?
I think when we hear the word modernization of
Yeah.
a legacy system, there's fear involved.
Yeah.
Because it's a change, it's a huge change if you're trying to modernize a 1980s mainframe application. And I think that the fear of failure does more to failure itself than anything.
Yeah.
And so what we need to do is look at why we need to do what we do. What are the citizens needing? What are they exposed to outside? And what do they expect from us in terms of services that they can just, for lack of a better term, reach out and touch, and without having to click 15 times to get to it if it's automated.
Yeah.
And so the expectations are high of us. And when we look at some of the legacy systems we have, that fear of, oh my God, am I going to get it right? Can we even do this? It's going to take so much money. It's going to take so much time. I think we need to just reset and say, well, wait a minute. We have more power in our iPhones and Android phones than many of these mainframes have. So it's really not that complicated. We just need to set the fear aside and think about it in every way possible, emotional, traditional, every way, because then it comes to you. It's just a natural progression, right?
Yeah, and to Marcy's point, it's not a one and done
No.
either. I think that's the other thing, is we're taking this big undertaking, but it needs to be thought of.
And you can't lock yourself up.
Yeah.
You have to go out and engage the stakeholders. It's a continuous process. It's not a one and done, like you said.
And that was the point that I was going to make, is I think historically, a lot of IT organizations, and I've seen this both in federal and state government, are kind of a service delivery organization. You tell us what you need, and we provide that for you, almost more as a commodity. And I think the concept of modernization is much more of a partnership, and really understanding what are the gaps for this agency to be able to deliver on their mission. What are their customers not able to do or
Yeah.
asking for, or using really expensive channels to get what they need? They're
Yeah.
calling, they're coming in person, they're escalating to whomever. How do we partner in a fundamentally different way to really not just be the order taker who throws a procurement out, but to really understand in a fundamentally kind of deep way and partner with them?
Yeah. And I think along those lines, it has to mean prioritization. What are the, to your points as well, we have limited resources. What are the pain points that their customers are most experiencing and working together? It can't be here's my wish list, but we have to work with them systematically. And I think our vantage point is to be able to look across all of the agencies and identify common problems or common areas where, a single piece of software might solve multiple people's issues and focus on some of those things. So to me, modernization is how we, how we're sort of efficient with some of that investment.
I think it's also, I love the point about one piece of software might serve multiple
Yeah.
problems or multiple agencies. Our customers do not understand how we are organized, nor should they need to be able to get what they
Yeah.
need. So
Yeah.
how do we get out of the silos
Yeah.
that we are in, that we need to be in, but from the people that we are serving shouldn't need to know that to be able to interact.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Whether you're trying to get a business license or whether trying to apply for healthcare benefits, it's powered by something, and there's probably similar sets of similar pieces of software that can build towards that. So, we all know that Governor Moore's main priority is leave no one behind. So in regards to IT, what does that mean to you? Greg or Andrew? Or?
I can jump in. I think leaving no one behind is obviously the part of the governor's focus and his mantra. I definitely believe in that too. I think it's really important with accessibility and with my role in the creation of the new Office of Accessibility. We've got a big opportunity to integrate accessibility into IT solutions development, into the procurement process, because in all honesty, accessibility has been kind of an afterthought across the entire country, really, and here at the state of Maryland at times too. We want to make sure that that accessibility is done up front, is integrated into procurement cycles, integrated into the dev cycle, and we just really, going to champion, myself and Marcy and others who are involved in accessibility, going to champion accessibility and really try to make sure that we talk about it in multiple settings so that it becomes, so when people think about accessibility in the same way they think about cybersecurity and how important cybersecurity is.
Yeah, no, that's a perfect segue, because as Andrew was talking about accessibility, something we want to do with security is make sure the controls, the best case controls we can put in, best practices, are accessible. And that we're not leaving people behind because their accessibility requirements are different than others, and making sure those controls support all of that. We don't want to, exclude one group because they have different requirements, and everybody deserves the same level of protection, and we have to make sure that the security is part of that and takes that into account.
Other thoughts on leave no one behind?
Yeah, if I could jump in here as well. From an AI perspective, I think first, I love these road signs that are all around Maryland
Yeah.
for us. You enter every day when I come in from DC
It's a
into
great
Maryland. It's
reminder,
fantastic.
yeah.
It's a great reminder. I think from the AI perspective, building in guardrails into the DNA of how we deploy AI at Maryland to make sure that it's safe, to make sure that it's privacy preserving, to make sure that it's responsible and secure and robust. I think we've seen sort of across the country and sort of in headlines that a lot of, especially from a bias perspective, a lot of sort of the harms that have manifested from AI have come from and to be felt by marginalized communities in a lot of circumstances. And so we need to avoid that. And so building in sort of the right set of standards is super important.
Any thoughts? I'll say, from my perspective, I see DoIT as an enabling organization. And so, back to the point of how we're partnering with agencies. We are in a role to help them meet their mission to deliver services by, procuring making the best technology available to them, and also, overseeing their IT operations so they can, to your point, IT is not top of mind for them. They're able to focus on where they're subject matter experts. But I do think, particularly, Greg and Andrew, I think you have a really unique role in that, security and accessibility need to be at the beginning of all dev cycles, to be at the beginning of everything and sort of woven in. And I think, Sean, likewise, there's a good opportunity when we think about where tech is headed to think about how we focus on those use cases where the most people can be served first. You and I have talked about this a lot. I want to make sure as we're developing or bringing AI better into our technology arsenal that we're not looking at the tool first and then saying, oh, how might I apply this? But that we're looking at large data sets and big problem areas first, and then saying, what are the AI tools that can operationalize that? All right, so we have a couple of questions that we've crowdsourced, so I will transition to those. Nishant, a lot of questions for you. People are excited about the AI. So first question for you, will this new initiative be considering what and how AI can be used to upskill job seekers? And whoever wrote that, I really appreciate that, because I think, and to Michelle's point, there's a lot of fear, around displacement, but we don't often talk about how, and you mentioned this a bit earlier, how we work with it to, augment us and make us better at our jobs.
Yeah, sort of as you mentioned earlier, the way I view AI is sort of as helping us do what we do better. I think in the near future, that is the primary use case for the technology. I think we could probably interpret this question a bunch of different ways too. I'll sort of take it how we upskill job seekers in the use of AI is sort of how I sort of read that question. To be honest, I haven't thought a whole lot about AI and sort of job seeker upskilling, but it is probably somewhere where the state should have a point of view and sort of a set of resources. AI is just a tool, and there have to be a set of mechanisms in place to upskill folks around this, whether it's sort of job seekers or folks within DoIT internally. You can imagine that manifesting in a lot of different ways. From effective prompt engineering on ChatGPT to how do you build neural networks? There's amazing resources online and elsewhere that are free, that are super helpful, that I've definitely used in time and would encourage others to sort of take a look at as well. If folks have good ideas here, we would love to hear them, and so please send them our way.
Yeah, I think along those lines, so yes, I want to second, we would love to hear more ideas, but I think some of the things that I've heard so far, whether it's constituent services or in the healthcare space, so how do we triage or sort of parse the most important cases where people are experiencing issues, or, again, sort of parsing big data sets, cybersecurity, for example. And I think how, people who can learn how to make that a tool, will be successful. So knowing, and maybe Michelle, you might have comments on this as well, knowing that AI is going to grow tremendously in the next few years, what are the most important targets for IT, and are they for IT in general, and then maybe specifically to DoIT?
I think one of the things that the use of AI and machine learning is going to do for us is it's going to speed up the process of getting from point A to point B. So in terms of protecting our information technology, we need to be as smart or smarter, and sometimes that's a big challenge. And that's where we might be able to leverage some of the platforms that we have that already have AI built into them. They offer AI chatbots, they offer AI processes to from a cybersecurity standpoint, to look at vulnerabilities, to provide reporting. But I think that how we implement it is going to be very important. And one of the values of using it in what I call a controlled environment, like a platform, assuming that the vendor knew what they were doing when they built it into their platform, and most of the major ones do. that we use it as a tool. But I think the most important piece is going to be securing it. And that's my segue over to you, Greg. What's your continuation of that?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have to make sure that we're thinking about securing our systems against the use of AI. That doesn't mean we block it. You know, it's an innovative technology we need to enable, and you know, Nishant has some really important work to do in that area. So we want to make sure that we're fostering that innovation. But you know, things like bias and privacy are really big concerns when it has to do with AI. So those are things we need to make sure we have the right principles in place to protect against that. The flip side is that, you know, the hope is that we'll be able to use those same tools to process large amounts of security data quickly to help us identify abnormal and potentially malicious activity quickly. So rather than the average of 100, I think it's 97 days right now, of dwell time with a threat actor being in your network, that we'll be able to cut that down to minutes. You know, and really by identifying those malicious actors and activities quickly, we really do a much better job in protecting our systems and the people who use them.
No, I think it's a great point. We have to be prepared for the flip side of it as well. How can AI be utilized against us? So
I think from a data management
Yeah.
standpoint, also using the technology behind AI and machine learning to better manage our data, especially in
Yeah.
environments where data is siloed and the citizens don't want to go searching in 7 different areas to
Yeah.
find what they need.
Yeah.
So if we can get the data properly managed in one location,
Yeah.
so that it's kept private, it's kept secure, but it is available to the people that need it in a way that they need it. If they need to know something about my background, doesn't mean they need my social security number, for example. They don't need other personal information, but they may need something else. And so how we manage our data is going to be, I think, enhanced by the use of AI and ML technologies. They're maturing, and some people have jumped into the fray, but it's definitely an opportunity.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of opportunity in the data sharing to make it easier on the end users to get the information and the services they need, rather than having those siloed systems and siloed data stores. And it's all about the principles on access and how you use that data, you know, and making sure that, you know, we're only giving people access to what they need to get that job done. And AI is one of those things that I believe can help manage that data, as Michelle was saying, and help make those access decisions on, you know, looking at the context of what you're trying to do
Yeah.
and who you are, and then say, okay, well, you really only need this bit of data,
Yeah.
so we're only going to let you access that bit of data.
Just to add to that, you know, in terms of the use cases, the important targets for IT, the original question, I think, you know, the way I think about this is in terms of pilots and use cases, where do we start? What are sort of the low risk but high impact,
Yeah.
yet high learning potential pilots that we can be taking on, that are repeatable in nature? You know, using natural language interfaces to help citizens cut through bureaucracy.
Yeah.
If we prove that out in one area, that's obviously a repeatable function in a lot of different ones.
Yeah.
And so that sort of, there's a lot of sort of learning and conquering of steep learning curves that we'll have to do as a set of agencies. And I think targeting the places that are most repeatable to start will be a good sort of first step.
Yeah, and even starting in those silos and starting with really strict guardrails and growing and expanding, you know, as we learn. You know, the key is really understanding what the AI is doing behind the scenes, under the covers, and as long as we understand that, we can make use of it in the best way possible and the most secure way possible.
One more AI question. It seems that every platform, including many of our DoIT platforms, are integrating some aspect of AI. What will the state's approach be to a tool or site that might not specifically be an AI tool, but that integrates it? So you're looking at like a productivity suite that has something, for example. We've touched on this a little bit around data and security, but any thoughts on?
I think AI will be a part of every software suite that we use essentially
Yeah.
everywhere. This is inevitable. It's already happening. And in fact, it's already used in most everything that you currently use.
Yeah.
So it's sort of like, what part of AI do we find risky? And so
Yeah.
we do want to work on sort of a set of internal guidelines and policies and sort of rulemaking around what should be used and what shouldn't be used. That's sort of TBD, and we need to do a little bit more research to figure out what makes sense there.
I think how we deliver solutions that use AI are going to have to be approached in some of the ways that Marcy talked about. So certain platforms like Salesforce or ServiceNow, which we have in our state, they have AI chatbot capabilities. They have AI, or robotic process automation capabilities. What we have to remember is when we deploy these, when we use these, it's not just about using them responsibly, but it's about thinking about what you need to know before you launch something like that. So the typical example is you have a service desk, you want to launch a chatbot so that your service technicians can focus on the calls that really require the most attention. And if somebody just wants to know, how do I order this software package for my computer, they can engage with the chatbot. What you have to think of beforehand are what are the questions that the chatbot needs to anticipate and what are the appropriate answers.
Yeah.
And that requires that you know how your process runs so that you can point them in the right direction and not send them on a wild goose chase and go through 17 different questions to get to what they need.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point. It's also, and I think Marcy would probably agree, it's what is the information you need to know? Back to this idea of let's just not implement AI, any sort of random tool. And I think a lot of that early policing work, for example, and a lot of, we should rightfully be concerned about bias, and a lot of it was trained on targets and individuals. How do we identify, people and communities that might pose a risk? But was that actually the question, or did we need to understand location data? Where is there a location risk? Where are we seeing crime? And I think that paradigm shift made it less about we're targeting people or making biased assumptions about people, and made it more where we're sort of crunching information about the location. And I think there's probably a lot of other parallels in how we choose to deploy the tool. And to your point, what is the information we actually need to know, and how can we deploy it in an unbiased way?
And do the training data sets support
And the training
that?
data sets is really
You
important.
can imagine
Yeah.
in some cases where there's old data being used that's
Right.
no longer accurate or
Right.
useful to make predictions.
Right.
And we have lots of examples of this across the country where that's
Yeah.
yielded bad outcomes. So
Yeah.
focusing on the training data as well.
I think that's right, and and Melissa and I've talked a little bit about the procurement side of this, but I think it'll be really important to make sure that we're good data stewards, that we have ownership of the data, figuring out what our ownership is around the algorithms that are being generated using state data. I think there's a lot of really interesting procurement and finance questions as well.
Absolutely.
Any other AI thoughts, reactions? If not, I think we have a security question. I'll turn to Greg. So we're entering, we're entering holiday season. It's PSL season, right? I'm not a fan, but with the holidays coming up and things like that, if people wish to travel, what is and bring laptops overseas or things like that, how are we thinking about the security policy?
Yeah, that's an excellent question, and I think very relevant to this time of year. It's one of the areas that the current security manual might be a little weak in, its guidance it provides. So that's one of many policies and standards we're evaluating and working on developing and getting out to the state. With travel, we have to be really cognizant about what happens in other places. And, the lack of protections vary wildly from one place to the next, especially on privacy and security controls and censorship. So those are all the factors that we have to consider when we develop a standard or policy around travel outside the United States, and what devices you can and can't bring, or what systems you can or can't access. So at this point, I don't have a solid policy to provide, but it's one that we will prioritize given the time of year, and I'm sure a lot more people are going to ask that question. And we'll get that developed, we'll talk about it internally, evaluate that, and, I would say keep an eye on the OSM webpage over the next couple months to watch as we roll out new policies and standards for the state.
Yeah.
And that'll be accessible up there. And, we're trying to make these standard and accessible to everybody. So,
Yeah.
We're not going to keep them internal and private. We want people to be able to see them and read them and know
Yeah.
them.
And tooling, I'd imagine, as well. What are the sort of standard, we want to make sure you're using a VPN, we want to make sure
Sure.
CrowdStrike is on your,
Yeah.
sort
I
of those
was
pieces.
going to mention the technologies that will enable
Yeah.
the
Right.
execution of the policy, right?
Yeah.
So that if you're in the United States, it's a different proposition than
Right.
if you're in an outside country.
Right.
I know where I've served before in the federal government, we always used to say, it depends on where you're going.
Yeah.
And we would point people to the State Department
Yeah.
site where you can, query the country that you're going in, and they'll tell you what the level of risk is, and
Yeah.
that would tell us, can you bring your phone, can you bring your laptop, do you, and there's some countries you bring nothing, or you
I was
bring a
gonna say,
disposable
I
phone.
loved working for DoD because it was like, well, I guess you can't bring anything.
Yeah.
No devices.
Yeah.
It's-
So there's the policy, and then there's
Yeah.
the technology that enables the enforcement or the
Yeah.
execution of the policy.
Yeah.
So that, I think people get it. I think there has been so much in the press and then even in the national news about cybersecurity hacks and people whose phones or computers or entire healthcare systems that have been
Yeah.
exposed. So it's not something that's foreign to us.
Yeah.
And when we tell people about why we want to protect these things in the policies, we explain why we're doing what we're doing to a certain extent. People aren't unreasonable,
Yeah.
but they need a means of communication. And so what we need to provide them is alternatives.
Yeah.
And some of those may be or may not be technology-based.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, we want to enable people to be able to do their jobs. We want to, allow what is reasonable and sensible, but we have to think about the bigger picture. And it's not about any one individual's
Yeah.
job or project they need to get done or deadline. It's really about protecting the states and our residents,
Yeah.
and their personal information. So, that's going to be the ultimate driver on how we protect that.
Yeah.
As it should be.
Yeah. And Andrea, I want to challenge you. I think as we're publishing some of this guidance, this might be a good opportunity to police ourselves a bit and
Absolutely.
make sure that all this information is readily accessible.
Absolutely.
I know we're just about out of time, but any thoughts or final reflections anyone wants to share?
I'm super happy to be here, that's for sure, and I'm glad to be working with this fine group of people.
Same.
Likewise.
Melissa, any thoughts as a DoIT veteran? Any guidance for us?
I'm also glad that you're all here. There's plenty of work to be done, there's
Yeah.
always room for improvement.
We should.
And I really do believe we have, outside of this group, we have a tremendous team
Yeah.
that everybody really wants to just see DoIT succeed
Yeah.
and make sure that we're doing the best that we can. And we have, we just have so much potential. And so I think that if we can all just bring that together, then we can do amazing things.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I do in a second. We have an incredible team, and everyone. I say this to the staff a lot, but when I encounter other cabinet secretaries, other people in administration, I'm always told what a great job we're doing, and the level of service we're providing. And, you know, there's definitely work to do. You know, I know, Michelle, you and I have talked a lot about how we bring clarity to our product and service catalog. You know, Greg, we've talked about that we need to, I think, be really intentional about our cybersecurity strategy and making sure that we're looking at DoIT services, in kind of concentric circles, DoIT services, agency, and kind of then looking outward. Yeah, and Marcy, obviously, we have a lot of upside to think about a holistic digital experience strategy for the state. There's been products bannered in a lot of different places, but you know, ultimately, what's the message we're trying to tell the people of Maryland about what we want their digital experience to be? You know, I was thinking recently about the expectation that you go to a government website, and if it doesn't work, you might think like, oh, the site's not working. I want to get to a point where if it doesn't work, we're getting a phone call because we have 99% uptime, you know, and that would mean something is wrong. Not that the user might think it's just I can't get it to load on my machine or whatever. So I think there's a lot to do, but I really appreciate all of you being here. You all have an incredible wealth of experience, so I think we can do some great things. All right. Well, I want to thank you all for participating in the discussion. And more importantly, I want to thank all of you, the audience, for taking the time to tune in. If you like what you saw today, feel free to like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. I know we have an Insta as well and a couple other platforms. And to learn more about the Maryland Department of Information Technology, please visit our website at doit.maryland.gov. Thank you and have a great day.
All right, we're out.
Great.